Welcome to Twists of Life, where every story has an unexpected turn. Stories of joy and sorrow, hope and redemption, just like the life we all live. Make yourself comfortable. It's time to begin. Sarah trudged from the bus stop towards home. It was the very beginning of spring, and it was getting dark noticeably later. Just 2 weeks ago at this time, it was pitch black night, but now, merely light lilac twilight. The woman's hands were weighed down by 2 bags of groceries, fruit for her daughter, bread, a good piece of meat from which she could make both borscht and goulash. And treats, of course. How could she do without them? Today they had received an advance. Tomorrow was a day off, which meant Sarah and her daughter would have their traditional Friday movie night. Chloe had already chosen some comedy. Sarah smiled. Her daughter, if anything made the woman's life happy, full, and meaningful, it was she, Chloe. And now she was 8 years old. The girl went to the school near their home. She was an excellent student. Although Sarah never did homework with her, just helped sometimes with extra projects, nothing more. The woman wished she could spend more time with her child, but she had to work a lot, a great deal, to provide for herself and her daughter. Well, Chloe managed perfectly well on her own. She was responsible, clever, serious, and very independent. Since first grade, the girl had to do everything herself. She went to school alone because by the time Chloe left the house, her mother was already halfway to work on the bus. She came back after school to an empty apartment, tidied up, ate lunch, and sat down to do her homework. She set an alarm on her phone to start getting ready for practice on time. Chloe was in the basketball section at her school. The coach said the little one had an iron will and great prospects in this sport. A miracle, not a child. Sarah smiled, thinking about her girl. Yes, she was incredibly lucky to have her. And yet, the woman watched with a heavy heart as children everywhere were accompanied by caring adults, loving grandparents, stay-at-home mothers, fathers. These girls and boys had more time for games. They were cared for and looked after. Adults made the little ones' lives happier, brighter, safer. Yes, at first Sarah was very worried that her little girl, with a huge backpack on her shoulders, walked around everywhere alone. Her colleagues were always surprised. Aren't you afraid a bad person will take her? What if a dog attacks her? What if she gets lost? Sarah just sighed. Of course, all these fears were present. There was no escaping them. Only in Chloe was the woman sure that she wouldn't go anywhere with a stranger, would avoid a pack of dogs, and would definitely find her way home. She was surprisingly mature for her age, attentive, sensitive, intelligent, and Sarah had no other choice. She couldn't afford to stay home with the child, and she couldn't even change jobs to something closer to home because the Streudetal factory, where the woman worked as an economist, paid well. What it cost her just to get hired here. Her salary now exceeded the city average. The single mother and daughter weren't living in luxury, but this money was enough for clothes, apartment rent, groceries, and even entertainment. If Sarah earned less, they simply wouldn't survive. And then Eleanor would be able to do what she had long dreamed of. Remembering her former mother-in-law, Sarah shivered and shrugged. A terrible person. And yet, once upon a time, she had seemed so sweet, so open, so kind to Sarah. When many years ago David brought the already pregnant Chloe to meet his parents, the girl was very nervous. She understood perfectly well how their situation looked from the outside. A village girl, without kith or kin, without a penny to her name, had charmed a guy from a wealthy family, muddled the young man's mind, taken advantage of his weaknesses, and deliberately gotten pregnant. And now David was simply obligated to marry her as an honest and noble man. In reality, of course, it wasn't like that at all. But even Sarah's classmates, who knew her very well, made such assumptions. "Well done," red-haired Lisa sincerely praised her upon hearing the news. "You seem so quiet and proper, but you managed to arrange your life in a way we could only dream of. Now you'll live and deny yourself nothing. Excellent plan. By the way, I should try that too." "Why not?" "I also want to be the wife of a rich husband. It's a normal desire." The girls weren't being sarcastic or malicious. They were genuinely happy for their friend. She, as they saw it, had pulled off a risky scheme and emerged victorious, receiving a proposal from an eligible bachelor. Perhaps after her friend's reaction, Sarah realized that everyone else thought exactly the same way. And David's parents? They, of course, would look at her as an enemy. Well, naturally. A village bumpkin had appeared in the city and decided to establish herself here through a successful marriage. David was indeed from a very wealthy family, but Sarah didn't find that out right away. The guy dressed in simple jeans and t-shirts, preferring comfortable sneakers to expensive shoes. Yes, it turned out the watch on his wrist and his cell phone were expensive. An experienced eye would have immediately recognized that. But how was a village girl supposed to know about the cost of accessories? A watch was a watch, a phone was a phone. Usually, David came to the institute on a motorcycle. Many guys showed up in expensive cars. There, it was immediately clear that their families were well off. But here, a motorcycle. Sarah had always thought that bikes weren't that expensive. Anyone could afford one. Also, David worked part-time at a large real estate firm, doing some not particularly skilled job, as a courier or something like that. That's why Sarah wasn't surprised by him having a motorcycle. He had probably saved up from his salary or taken out a loan. At the beginning of his relationship with Sarah, David didn't mention that the firm he worked for belonged to his father. The girl couldn't even imagine that his parents were so successful and wealthy. For a long time, Sarah watched David from afar. They studied in different departments. The guy was a student in the prestigious finance and economics program. After school, Sarah also really wanted to get in there. She studied a lot, spent days and nights poring over textbooks, but she didn't make it into that department. She didn't pass. Sarah, a poor girl from the village, wanted to escape poverty. She had wonderful parents, kind, understanding, supportive. But Sarah didn't want to repeat their fate. They lived in a small house without plumbing. There was a huge wash basin on the wall, and that's where they had to wash. The toilet was outside, and there was also a bathhouse in the yard, but they only heated it on weekends. Sarah's parents worked a lot, but there wasn't enough money in the family. Was it like that for everyone? Other families lived exactly the same way. It was just that in their village, there were objectively not enough jobs for everyone, and salaries were tiny. People didn't despair. They persevered. They survived. But for herself, Sarah didn't want such a fate. Her parents supported their daughter in her desire to get an education and stay living in the city. They even tried not to burden Sarah with housework. They wanted the girl to devote all her time to studying. "Study, darling," her mother instructed. "Study. Don't be lazy. God willing, you'll make something of yourself. You have a head on your shoulders." "Your teacher says you're smart and promising," her father echoed. Sarah truly was the best in her class. Studying came easily to her. Sarah viewed the university entrance exams as an important undertaking that would be a turning point in her fight for a happy life. And the girl endured this battle with dignity. Based on the exam results, Sarah scored many points. The result pleasantly surprised the applicant. But still, these points weren't enough to get into the state-funded program of the Finance and Economics Department. Sarah felt disappointment mixed with surprise then. How could that be? In her school, she was head and shoulders above others, so why had so many people suddenly surpassed her? Later, the girl learned about tutors who coached applicants for test questions, and about the little gifts that parents of prospective students brought to the dean's office. But back then, Sarah blamed herself for not preparing well enough. She was just a few points short of being admitted to the state-funded program. Meanwhile, she easily qualified for the fee-paying program. Well, you can study for a year or two on the paid program, and then someone will surely be expelled, and you'll transfer to the state-funded one. An unfamiliar older student girl comforted Sarah. She couldn't walk past Sarah, who was crying by the results board. Many people do that. You were only a little short on points, so you clearly have brains. They like and promote students like that. Sarah just shook her head. This girl couldn't understand that even 1 year's tuition fee was an unbearable burden for her family. Sarah had already decided that the year was lost. She would have to go back to the village and prepare for admission again, more seriously this time. And even that wasn't a guarantee that the girl's dream would come true the following year. But that same comforter, the random older student Sarah met on her way, offered a completely different solution. "Why do you need this finance and economics program?" She shrugged. "Mostly only those with connections study here, plus kids of wealthy parents. They actually give the exact same education in the enterprise economics department. It's even better there. Less pretense." How grateful Sarah was then to her accidental savior. She tried to find this girl later, talk to her, say thank you, but it didn't work out. It turned out that Sarah had more than enough points for the other department, so she did become a student after all. As a village resident, she was given a dormitory room and a social scholarship. Sarah couldn't believe her luck for a long time. The girl studied diligently, attended all lectures, submitted term papers on time, and always did her homework. Professors praised her and held her up as an example to others. This even made Sarah feel a little awkward. The girl devoted all her time and energy to studying. However, she also had to work 2 or 3 hours in the evening as a salesperson at the bakery nearest the dormitory. The scholarship wasn't enough to live on. Her parents, despite their best efforts, couldn't help their daughter, so Sarah managed as best she could. Naturally, she had absolutely no time for clubs, discos, or student parties. Sometimes this made her a little sad, but each time Sarah reminded herself of the goal she was striving for, and everything immediately fell into place. Sarah's friends and classmates often enthusiastically told her about their weekends, shared details of romantic adventures, and vividly described their admirers. At such moments, the girl also dreamed of having a worthy young man by her side. Loving, caring, cheerful, handsome, of course. Someone she could fall head over heels in love with. But the guys who came into Sarah's view didn't fit the role of a prince. No, many of them were handsome and cheerful. But these young men, they seemed too careless, frivolous, and selfish to Sarah. No, the girl wouldn't have been able to tie her fate to any of them. Her friends jokingly called Sarah a bore, and when she refused to go to another party with them, they warned her that she would face old age alone, surrounded by 10 cats. And then, in her 4th year, the girl finally saw a guy who didn't leave her indifferent. And how had she not noticed him before? Strange. The young man expertly rode into the parking lot on a black motorcycle. He was wearing jeans, a black t-shirt, and a helmet was perched on his head. What was it about David that attracted her then? Was it the way he expertly handled his iron horse? Or his unique, graceful posture? At that moment, he resembled a prince riding out for a stroll on a noble steed. One way or another, Sarah, who was hurrying to the library, stopped and watched from a distance as the motorcyclist dismounted and removed his helmet. For some reason, the girl really wanted to see his eyes. She shouldn't have. Because when David, as if sensing her gaze, looked toward Sarah, the girl knew she was lost. piercing turquoise eyes on a tanned face, a snow-white smile, thick hair of some incredibly pleasant wheat shade. Sarah could have admired this guy endlessly if she didn't have to observe the rules of decency. The girl suddenly felt awkward, standing here, staring at a stranger. What would he think of her? Sarah sharply turned around and hurried towards the building where the library was located. The guy caught up with her. He caught up right near the entrance. He gently took Sarah's arm. She turned around and blushed, meeting his slightly mocking gaze. The stranger smiled at her warmly, openly, sincerely. Sarah had never felt such feelings before. It was hard to describe in words. Goosebumps ran in waves down her back and neck. Warmth spread through her body. Her heart pounded like crazy. That day marked the beginning of Sarah and David's romance. At first beautiful, like a fairy tale, but it ended more like a bad horror movie. David confessed that he had felt the girl's gaze and understood from her eyes that it was with her that he could be happy. Later, analyzing the situation, Sarah realized that at that moment, the guy was simply sated with beautiful girls from wealthy families. They were all spoiled, selfish princesses whom it was impossible to surprise or please with anything. And here, a simple, unsophisticated girl from the village, very pretty besides. Sarah looked at David with loving eyes, hung on his every word, and admired everything he did or said. She was delighted by such trifles as a simple bouquet of roses. The luxury of the restaurant's ambiance amazed her. David found it interesting to observe the behavior and emotions of an unspoiled girl. He was a person who was opening up a completely new world to the poor student. It was intoxicating, instilled faith in his own power and uniqueness, and tickled his ego. And of course, David also developed some feelings for the girl for whom he was everything. Otherwise, it was impossible. But the guy never intended to make Sarah the center of his universe. However, Sarah only realized all this later, when problems began. At first, it seemed to her that David was performing one feat after another for her. The guy spent money on his girlfriend without stinting. Sarah felt awkward about it. She even tried to refuse at first. If anyone knew, Sarah knew perfectly well that money didn't come easily. David worked as a courier and earned money, but that didn't mean he had to spend everything on her. The guy just smiled at all her objections and gave Sarah another luxurious gift. Their relationship was sometimes like a romantic comedy, sometimes like a beautiful melodrama. David was so sweet, so considerate. He courted her incredibly beautifully and always knew how to cheer the girl up. Sarah still devoted a lot of time to studying, but now lectures and seminars didn't constitute her entire life. Amazingly, there was enough time for everything, for dates with David and for poring over notebooks. It was a wonderful, unforgettable time. David and Sarah had been dating for about a year by the time the girl realized with horror that she was expecting a child. At first, Sarah couldn't believe it had happened. After all, they had been so careful. But one test after another consistently showed two bright lines, so she had to accept this fact. The girl was in despair. Her diploma, state exams, the finish line were approaching. She had worked towards this for so long. Okay, perhaps the pregnancy itself wouldn't prevent her from preparing for the final tests. She would write her thesis, pass exams and credits. But by the end of her 5th year, she would have a huge belly. Who would hire her like that? She would have to stay home and take care of the child. And what had those 5 years of study been for then? Would David be happy about this news? Would he take responsibility for Sarah and the child? Their relationship seemed to be elevated, trusting. But a beautiful romance was one thing, and a burden in the form of a pregnant Sarah was another. The girl cried for about an hour from despair, from hurt, from fear for the future, And then she calmed down and decided to tell everything to the person on whom her fate depended. David received the news of Sarah's pregnancy unexpectedly joyfully. For him, it was still a game. Wow, we're going to be parents. The guy's eyes lit up. A smile appeared on his face. We'll have our own little one. Cool. He was happy about the child like a new toy. Only Sarah didn't notice this then. She was happy that the man she loved didn't perceive the pregnancy as a problem. "And what are we going to do now?" the girl asked hopefully, looking at David. "We'll get married, of course," he smiled, putting an arm around Sarah's shoulders. "We'll get married, finish studying, then I'll go to work, and you'll go on maternity leave." "And where will we live?" This question worried Sarah very much. She would likely be asked to leave the dormitory soon. Would she have to move into David's apartment? Living with a husband's relatives is probably difficult. They would have to get used to each other, adjust. "We'll live in my apartment," David shrugged. "My father gave it to me a long time ago. It's big, spacious. You'll like it. I would have moved there long ago, but my mother, she said I could only do it when I got married. That's the condition she set. And now I'm getting married." "You have an apartment?" Sarah still couldn't believe what she had just heard. "Who are your parents?" She knew little about David's family. He preferred to change the subject whenever Sarah brought it up. "Well, what's there to tell about them?" David winced annoyedly. "Parents are parents. My mother is a housewife. She spent her whole life looking after me and my brothers, taking us to clubs and all that. She has 3 of us. Remember I told you?" Sarah nodded. David had indeed mentioned that he had 2 older brothers. "Well, there," the guy continued. "So, my mother takes care of the house. My father runs his business. He has a real estate agency. Didn't I tell you?" "No," Sarah shook her head. David had never said that the firm where he worked as a courier was owned by his own father. "Well, there, now I'm telling you. So don't worry, we'll definitely have a place to live. By the way, I need to introduce you to my parents. Now my mother will be happy. She thinks I have a screw loose. She's always holding up my older brothers as examples, saying they're serious, unlike me. Now she'll find out that I'm responsible too." Sarah was very afraid of meeting David's parents. The guy was completely confident that his fiancée would be liked by both his father and mother. The girl herself doubted it very much. Of course, no one would believe that Sarah hadn't suspected David's wealth. Look, even her friends think she deliberately got pregnant by a rich kid. What could his relatives say? But the meeting went more than successfully. Despite the fact that Sarah was initially flustered by the luxurious interiors of the mansion where David lived with his parents. A round table was set in the living room. Everything looked appetizing and appealing. But from nervousness, Sarah couldn't swallow a bite. David's parents introduced themselves. Eleanor, the future mother-in-law, smiled openly at the guest. She had the same piercing turquoise eyes as her son. The girl was amazed at how David's mother looked. This woman was much older than her own mother, but Sarah didn't notice any wrinkles on Eleanor's face. A slender, toned figure, flawless skin, a stylish, elegant dress. The groom's father, Arthur, didn't look his age at all either. Fit, energetic. In conversation, David's parents, despite all their wealth, turned out to be pleasant and simple people. Upon hearing Sarah's story, Eleanor was delighted. "What a clever girl you are," she praised the girl. "You've already achieved a lot through your own hard work. Amazing determination. I need people like that." Arthur joined the conversation. "After your maternity leave, I'll hire you, so don't worry about work." Sarah couldn't believe her luck then. Everything happening felt like a beautiful fairy tale. David's parents not only didn't show dissatisfaction with the poor pregnant daughter-in-law, but on the contrary, were sincerely happy to have her. "Our rascal needs exactly this kind of girl by his side," Eleanor said. shaking her head and smiling at Sarah. Responsible, serious, hardworking. What a blessing that you met. Sarah didn't understand then why his parents called David a rascal. He seemed like a perfectly serious and conscientious young man himself. Well, of course, he sometimes rode his motorcycle riskily. There was that. And he spent a lot of time with friends. But David was still quite young and carefree. It was natural that he wanted to have fun. When else would he do it, but in his youth? David's parents arranged a lavish wedding for the young couple. Sarah was embarrassed that they had taken on all the expenses. Her parents were also very awkward, but Eleanor behaved so simply, so naturally, that the tension gradually dissipated. Eleanor spoke very kindly and respectfully with Sarah's mother and father, and even thanked them for raising such a wonderful daughter. She smiled warmly at her daughter-in-law and showered her with compliments. Sarah truly looked like a real princess in the dress her mother-in-law helped her choose and paid for. In such an outfit, the bride behaved accordingly. David was proud that his young wife was such a beauty. For the first half of the wedding, he didn't let go of her hand. But then, when the official part was over, the guy, as always, ran off to his friends. Sarah was happy for her new husband then. She liked that he was so sociable and cheerful. Married life also resembled a fairy tale at first. Sarah now lived in a huge, stylishly furnished apartment. Before, the girl had only seen such interiors in fashion magazines. It took her a long time to get used to being the full mistress of all this splendor. Sarah now had her own card onto which a tidy sum magically appeared twice a month. This was David transferring money to his wife for household expenses. Accustomed to saving on everything, Sarah initially didn't even manage to spend the allowance. It was so wonderful, so unusual, to go to the store and toss everything she liked into the cart, instead of searching for discounted items. The girl's relationship with David's parents was excellent. She considered them family now. Eleanor often invited her daughter-in-law over. They talked for a long time. Sarah told her about her life, and her mother-in-law about hers. It turned out that Eleanor was also born and raised in a village, and then her family moved to the city, where the still very young girl met Arthur, her future husband, and the father of their 3 sons. He was just a simple accountant at the factory then, the woman recalled the past. It was later that Arthur started his own business. I helped him, supported him as much as I could. So it's our shared creation. And Eleanor often said that she had dreamed of having a daughter her whole life. I wanted a daughter so much, but we only had boys. And the youngest, your Davy, was born only because I was hoping for a girl. Last attempt, and then another boy. And strangely enough, the most loved of all 3. Although at first, of course, I was very disappointed. I was sure I was carrying a daughter this time. Eleanor's 2 older sons gave her a total of 4 grandsons. So even here, the woman didn't get to cuddle a beautiful little girl. I dream of buying my granddaughter dolls, braiding her hair, choosing beautiful dresses with her, doing everything I wanted to do with a daughter. And here are boys again. Train sets, building blocks, toy cars. No, I adore them, of course, but I really want something sweet, girly, pink. You are my only hope now. Before this confession from her mother-in-law, Sarah didn't care what sex her baby was. But after that, the girl suddenly realized that she also dreamed very much of a little girl with turquoise eyes like David's and long, beautiful hair. It really was wonderful. Braiding pigtails, tying bows, dressing the little one in pink dresses. But David, on the contrary, dreamed of a son. That's what he said. Although it started to seem to Sarah more and more often that this child wasn't important to him at all. David spent a lot of time at work, and in the evenings and on weekends, he ran off to his friends. This was so unlike the beginning of their relationship. Sarah hoped that when the baby was born, her young husband would settle down. But she was mistaken. Everything got even worse. Chloe was born on time. When they placed this tiny red creature on Sarah's chest, the girl understood. From this moment on, her life was divided into before and after. Now, she was a mother. David and his parents arranged a lavish discharge from the hospital for Sarah. Everything was there. An entertainer in a bear costume, pink and white balloons, flowers, happy and moved relatives, and of course, a cameraman who captured every moment of the celebration. Eleanor tremblingly took the pink bundle into her arms. Finally, her mother-in-law's long-held dream had come true. Now she had a granddaughter, long awaited and loved. David, of course, also seemed happy and even willingly posed for the photographer with his daughter in his arms. But Sarah immediately noticed that he was bored with it all. There was no genuine joy in the young father's eyes. Sarah didn't notice even a glimmer of the delight and admiration that she herself felt, or even her mother-in-law, David's mother. Family life began. Sarah completely immersed herself in caring for her daughter. Eleanor often visited the young mother and her newborn girl, teaching her daughter-in-law how to care for a baby. And Sarah was a first-time mother and didn't really know anything. How could she? However, the learning wasn't so complicated. Very soon, Sarah felt quite confident. But Eleanor continued to come, and the girl didn't object. She saw how happy her mother-in-law was about her long-awaited granddaughter. It was wonderful that someone else besides the parents loved the child, especially since David wasn't very interested in Chloe. His daughter rather annoyed him. He winced when the girl suddenly started crying, especially after bedtime, and complained about sleepless nights. No, David didn't get up when the baby cried. Sarah always rushed to the little one. It was just that these nighttime commotions interfered with the head of the family's proper sleep. David spent more and more time outside the home. The young husband might even fail to come home for the night. To all his wife's questions, David replied that he wasn't her slave, that he had a right to a break from family. Gradually, Sarah's rose-tinted glasses fell off. David showed himself for who he was. That's why Eleanor called her youngest son a rascal and insisted that he had a screw loose. David turned out to be completely unprepared for married life. The cares of a small child weighed him down. No, at family celebrations, he gladly carried his charming, well-dressed little daughter in his arms. Sarah saw that her husband was simply admiring himself and was proud of his new role as a father. But on ordinary days, David avoided any contact with the little one. He now preferred not to talk to Sarah. It was hurtful and confusing. In the end, Sarah, of course, found out what was going on. For the first time, Sarah accidentally overheard her husband's conversation. One morning, David thought his wife was sleeping soundly after rocking Chloe for 3 hours. The little one was feeling unwell. The girl had been fussy the day before and would only nap in her mother's arms. But Sarah, from exhaustion, couldn't close her eyes, and of course, heard everything. Although David tried to speak quietly, he was cooing, there's no other way to put it, with some seemingly very young girl calling her Bunny and my love, laughing at her remarks, promising they would have fun soon. Sarah lay in bed, barely restraining herself from bursting into the kitchen and making a scene. But that wouldn't lead to anything. David had long since become practically a stranger to her. They lived together, that was true. David, importantly, fully provided for her and Chloe. And what could she herself give her daughter if she left him now? So she had to pretend that nothing had happened. Since then, Sarah often noticed signs of David's infidelity. Girls called him when he was home. The man hardly hid it. No, of course, in his wife's presence, he spoke more restrainedly than when Sarah, in his opinion, couldn't hear anything. David might return home in the early morning, explaining everything with an important meeting with a business partner. At the same time, a bracelet from a nightclub often adorned his wrist, and David's clothes frankly smelled of women's perfume. And sometimes the man would go on another business trip for 5 to 7 days, returning from there invariably refreshed, rested, and sometimes even tanned, clearly under the southern sun. Sarah endured all this, feeling humiliated, crushed, lost, and broken during this period. After all, she still loved David, and until recently thought he had feelings for her too. Well, yes, he cooled off a bit. It happens, especially after a baby arrives in the family. For some men, it's like a test of strength. But David, it turned out he was having an affair. Even, probably, affairs. He addressed his young and, without a doubt, beautiful conversation partners differently. Sometimes Beth, sometimes Sophie, sometimes Olivia. Sarah, having put tiny Chloe to sleep, often cried, curled up in a ball in the armchair near her daughter's crib. The woman understood that she was in a desperate situation. Living with a husband who cheats left and right is unbearable. Meanwhile, David had long been looking at her, his lawful wife, as if she were nothing. And when was the last time they had a heart-to-heart talk? Sarah couldn't remember that moment. She had to leave him. Otherwise, the woman would soon completely lose herself. But what next? Where could she go with a small daughter in her arms? Back to a rented apartment, of course. But she would have to go back to work. Chloe was still tiny. She would surely get sick a lot at daycare, like all little kids. Who needs an employee like a young mother constantly taking sick leave? It was unlikely Sarah would manage to find a job during this difficult period. Going back to the village was also not a great idea. Sarah herself had once made every effort to escape from there, and now to live again in a tiny house without proper facilities, and to doom her daughter to such an existence. No, she had to come up with something else. Her mother-in-law, Eleanor, continued to visit her daughter-in-law and granddaughter frequently. Each time she gave Chloe luxurious gifts, sometimes a dress from a famous designer, sometimes tiny gold earrings, sometimes an expensive doll, sometimes some interesting game. It was clear that the elderly woman adored the girl. Sarah, as the mother of this long-awaited princess, also received gifts and attention. The sensitive Eleanor had long noticed that her daughter-in-law looked sad and pensive. She asked her directly many times, but Sarah always evaded the answers. She said she hadn't slept well with Chloe, that she had a headache. No, Eleanor was a wonderful person. Sarah had no doubt about that at the time. But how could she tell her about the humiliation Sarah had to endure day after day? But one day the woman realized she had to act. It happened on a rainy autumn evening. David came home late. He told his wife he'd had a business dinner at a restaurant. Sarah pretended to believe him, as always. But then she accidentally saw a photograph. David was scrolling through his phone's feed, looking at something, and smiling happily. The woman just glanced at the screen and froze. There was a photo. In it, David was posing, arm in arm with a beautiful blonde. She was smiling broadly and leaning affectionately against the man. It was a selfie. And then, as they say, Sarah's visor came down. "What is this?" Sarah, without intending to, immediately burst into a scream. David raised his completely calm eyes to her. This photograph, this indifference, this calmness of her husband, who seemed to see nothing unusual in the situation at all, finally drove Sarah mad. Long-suppressed emotions erupted along with sobs and insults. She called her husband names, screamed hurtful phrases directly into his face. She wanted to hurt him as much as possible. Sarah expected David to start making excuses, maybe even apologize. But he looked at her with a mixture of pity and disgust and remained silent. Sarah suddenly, completely losing control, slapped David hard. She put all her strength into the blow, so it was quite impactful. As if in slow motion, Sarah watched David's head snap back. He even had to clutch the table to keep from falling. Sarah achieved what she wanted. She jolted her husband out of his state of cold indifference. David looked at her with such malice that the woman turned cold with horror. The man approached her with long strides and grabbed her hair tightly. Sarah fully felt her husband's strong grip. If he wanted to, David could easily crush her with both hands. It was clear the man was barely restraining himself. Sarah, with eyes wide with fear for her own life, looked at her husband and blamed herself for the unexpected outburst. "Listen to me carefully," David hissed. "I'm telling you this once and only once. I won't repeat it. If this happens even one more time, you'll fly out of this apartment like a cork from a bottle. You'll stay the same penniless wretch you were before. You won't see any alimony because my salary is mostly unofficial. You'll get pennies. Do you understand?" Sarah nodded silently. She had already started to tremble violently. At that moment, the woman wanted only one thing: for all this to end quickly. But David didn't let go of her hair. On the contrary, he continued to wrap it around his fist. "Do you think I don't understand that you deliberately got pregnant by a rich guy? Do you think you're the only one so cunning? I didn't marry you because you're so cunning and sly. I'll explain why now. Firstly, you used to be quite attractive. Secondly, a marriage with someone like you should be easy and unburdensome. People like you should be happy with the conditions you found yourself in. Raise children, serve your husband, and don't open your mouth unnecessarily. Everyone has their own benefit. Yours is prosperity, wealth, a calm, secure life. Mine is freedom. Do I really need to explain this? Spell it out? Isn't it obvious?" David forcefully pushed his wife away. Sarah backed away towards the door. The man's eyes were still blazing with fury. Fortunately, he restrained himself and didn't hit his wife, but he was clearly very close to it. Sarah understood at that moment. A similar scene would happen again and again. David would find something to latch onto, and he might hit her. He could easily hit her, and he would do it sooner or later. After what happened, life went on as usual. David also disappeared somewhere day and night. Now he didn't hide it, talking to his girls right in front of his wife. Sarah was no longer just hurt. She was scared. She understood that she couldn't live like this for long. Such an existence was slowly destroying her. But there was no way out. David was right. She had nowhere to go, nothing to live on. And then, in despair, Sarah made the biggest mistake. She turned to Eleanor for help. The woman thought her mother-in-law had a good attitude towards her. She gave gifts, always spoke exclusively kindly, constantly complimented her, saying her daughter-in-law cooked wonderfully and raised her daughter correctly. Therefore, Sarah never expected to hear such words from Eleanor. "Well, that's not surprising," she shrugged. "Davy, he's been a rascal since he was young. I didn't expect, no, I once thought, hoped, that he would settle down, grow up. But now I see clearly, he's an eternal child." "But what should I do?" Sarah looked at her mother-in-law hopefully. Perhaps she would suggest a way out. "Well, what now? Live as you are living. David will provide for you and your daughter from head to toe. I guarantee that. Well, what can you do? That's the price for a comfortable life. You won't even talk to him." Tears welled up in Sarah's eyes. "I don't see the point." Eleanor shook her head. "You can't change David." I can't live with him. I'll get a divorce." "Foolish." Her mother-in-law seemed to start worrying. "And how will you manage alone? Alimony will be pennies. You have nowhere to live. I'll go back to my family in the village. Better that than endure all this. Chloe will grow up. Then I'll think about how to move back to the city." "You'll take Chloe." Now Eleanor became seriously worried. So I won't see her? No, I won't deprive you of her, Sarah assured. You can visit sometimes, or I can come to you, but I can't live with David anymore. He's cruel, selfish. It's destroying me. So I'll see my granddaughter when you graciously allow it, her mother-in-law clarified. It seemed she had ignored the words about her son. She was only concerned about Chloe, her long-awaited beloved granddaughter, the object of her grandmother's pride and adoration. But it turns out that way. After all, I'm her mother, so it's for me to decide who my child sees and when. You're mistaken, dear. How good that you confided your plans in me. The child will be left with David in the divorce. I'll take care of that. No. Now it was Sarah's turn to be scared. Children are usually left with their mother here. That's how it always is. Yes, but that's if the mother is able to support the child. And you? Are you going to deprive your daughter of normal living conditions? Take her to a remote village, to a house without amenities? And you don't have a job. And David has a large, well-appointed apartment. And they'll put whatever salary they need on his documents. So evaluate the chances yourself. But David doesn't need Chloe, Sarah exclaimed in despair. She hadn't expected such a turn of events at all. Just recently, the woman had considered her mother-in-law a future ally, a helper. Honestly, Sarah had counted on Eleanor helping her with Chloe, both morally and physically after the divorce. But it turned out that her mother-in-law had simply decided to take her daughter away from her. But I need her, Eleanor said slowly. I dreamed of a daughter my whole life, then a granddaughter. So many plans, so many hopes. And now I have Chloe. And now? Now you want to take her away? Oh no. Sarah still found the strength to leave her husband then. Chloe had just turned 3. It wasn't easy. Sarah was greatly supported by her parents and aunt then. They pooled their money so that their daughter and niece could rent an apartment in the city, a comfortable, clean, spacious one, such that it wouldn't raise questions from Child Protective Services, to whom Eleanor had, of course, turned. Her relatives paid the rent for the apartment for a full 6 months. During this time, Sarah enrolled her daughter in daycare and found a job. Now she had good living conditions and enough salary to support her child. That is, Eleanor couldn't take the girl. But the fight for Chloe continues to this day. Sarah hoped that one of Eleanor's sons would have a daughter, and her mother-in-law would shift her attention to her. But David, who soon after the divorce married a young woman resembling a photo model, became the father of 2 sons. The wife of one of his brothers also gave birth to a boy. So Chloe remained Eleanor's only granddaughter, which is why she didn't give up. Her former mother-in-law constantly filed complaints about Sarah with Child Protective Services, sometimes saying she wasn't looking after the child, sometimes that she was too busy with her personal life, sometimes that she was mistreating the girl. Both Sarah and her mother had already gotten used to police officers or Child Protective Services representatives often visiting them for checks. Naturally, they found no violations. But Sarah lived in constant fear. Who knows? Eleanor was a rich and influential woman. Sooner or later, she would come up with something, eventually orchestrate some situation. Sarah couldn't imagine life without Chloe anymore. The girl was the center of her universe. Everything Sarah did was for her daughter. David wasn't interested in Chloe's affairs and didn't participate in her life at all. He transferred meager alimony from the official part of his earnings, and that was it. This approach from her husband suited Sarah perfectly. He didn't interfere with contact. Good. Less hassle. It was a pity Eleanor wasn't so indifferent. Now Sarah was hurrying home. Chloe was surely already waiting impatiently for her mother from work. Sarah had indeed been delayed. She had stopped by the Rainbow Shopping Complex for a minute, but ended up spending almost an hour there. So many new things, so many interesting things, and good discounts everywhere. Now Sarah was hurrying home, skillfully navigating through the passers-by, of whom there were quite a few near the shopping complex at this hour. Suddenly, an old woman caught the woman's attention. Withered, hunched over, in an old coat, her head wrapped in a gray downy shawl, worn felt boots on her feet. The elderly woman's eyes were an amazing light blue color, as if slightly faded. The old woman looked around. She addressed one person, then another, but people didn't hear or see her. Passers-by, without slowing down, hurried about their business. But Sarah couldn't walk past. Drawing level with the old woman, she stopped. The grandmother seemed to realize that she finally had a listener. She looked Sarah directly in the eyes and whispered in a quiet voice, "Darling, please help me. I've found myself in a desperate situation." Sarah saw that this was indeed the case. Judging by the old woman's expression, she was in a state close to panic. "What happened?" Sarah asked in as gentle a tone as possible. "I came here for meat," the elderly stranger began to explain. "You know, there's a good place in the basement here. Well, so, while I was going back and forth, I put my hand in my pocket, and the wallet wasn't there. And only then did it dawn on me. I forgot it at home, didn't take it, left it on the nightstand. It's all because of Jasper the cat. While I was chasing that rascal from the street, everything just flew out of my head." "Okay, at least I had money for a one-way ticket in another pocket, so I got here without a problem. But how to get home now, I don't know." "So you need money for the bus?" Sarah clarified. "Yes, I do," the grandmother said, looking embarrassed. "It's awkward to ask like this, begging like a pauper. But what can I do? Bus drivers are mean now. They won't just give you a ride. And I also need the intercity bus. I live outside the city, in the village of Sunny." I tried to go back, asked a driver if he'd take me without money, and he chewed me out so badly in front of all the passengers that I'm afraid to ask another one now. "And what, none of the passengers helped?" Sarah was genuinely surprised. "No," the old woman said sadly. "Well, there weren't many people there, fortunately. Otherwise the driver would have shamed me. Truly shamed me. It's all right. Of course I'll help you." Sarah readily reached into her wallet. "Darling, thank you so much." The elderly woman was almost crying with gratitude. "God bless such a good, caring person. Give me your address or phone number. Better yet, write it down. My son will transfer the money to you later." "It's not necessary," Sarah smiled. "It's not hard for me to help. Kind people helped me in a difficult moment, too. So, thank you, my dear." Sarah nodded and walked on. She was in a hurry. Chloe was waiting for her at home. Sarah spent a wonderful evening with her daughter. They indulged in ice cream and pizza, watched movies, lying cuddled up on the sofa. At such moments, Sarah felt happy, protected. What warm and cozy evenings they were. The woman waited all week for Friday precisely so she could relax and unwind like this in her daughter's company. Sometimes, very rarely, on weekends, Sarah would go out somewhere with friends or colleagues, to the cinema, a bar, a nightclub. If Eleanor somehow found out about this outing, an obligatory visit from Child Protective Services employees immediately followed. And how did her mother-in-law manage to find out about her former daughter-in-law's personal life? Was she spying on her? Her friends thought it was high time Sarah found a man. Young, beautiful, her colleague Susan urged her. But always alone. You can't live like that. Chloe will grow up. She'll start her own life. And what about you? Will you be left alone? Sarah just smiled and shook her head. After David's betrayal, all men seemed like deceivers to her. No, she absolutely didn't want to date anyone, go on dates again, hope again that she had met the ideal person, and then be bitterly disappointed. Oh no! And frankly, Sarah didn't have time for romances. Work, child, household chores and problems. And all this on her fragile shoulders. No thank you. Up to that point? Not at all. Saturday mornings in Sarah and Chloe's family always started late. Mother and daughter preferred to sleep in after a hard work week and waking up at 6 in the morning. But this time, the sleepy silence of the apartment was broken by a sharp, piercing doorbell ring. Sarah slowly peeled open her eyelids and looked at the clock. It was only 10. I wonder who decided to bother them so early on a Saturday. Neighbors, probably. The woman reluctantly got out of bed and put on her robe. Sleepy Chloe was already coming out of the nursery. She looked so cute, so funny in her silly pajamas with little bears. Well, the morning visitor didn't let the girl lie in bed peacefully. Meanwhile, the doorbell rang a second time. "I'm coming," Sarah called out, trying not to sound too annoyed. The woman looked through the peephole, and immediately anxiety seized her. A man was standing on the landing, tall, young, unfamiliar. It wasn't one of the neighbors, as Sarah had first thought. "Who is it?" the woman asked. "My name is Mark," the person behind the door introduced himself. "I have a few questions for you." "Are you from the police?" Sarah was used to visits from officials, or perhaps from Child Protective Services. But usually they introduced themselves with their full name and patronymic, and added their rank. But here? "No, I'm not from the police. Do you understand? I'm the son of that old woman you gave money for a ticket yesterday." "Ah, that's what it is." The elderly woman had indeed sent her son to give her the money back. But how did this man know her address? Sarah hadn't given it to that grandmother yesterday. Strange and very suspicious. "I understand you're afraid to open the door to me," Mark's voice came from behind the door again. "And rightly so. In our time, you need to be vigilant. Let's do this. I'll go out of the building now and wait for you on the porch, okay? We'll talk there." "All right," Sarah agreed. Indeed, this was the most sensible option. At the same time, the stranger's morning visit still seemed strange and suspicious. First and foremost, the question that worried Sarah was, how did this person find her? The woman looked out the window. Mark was indeed standing near the entrance, waiting for her. It was a little scary to leave the apartment. What if this person was some kind of criminal after all, and his accomplice was still on the landing? But there was no one near the door. Sarah went downstairs. Mark met her on the porch. "You see, I have a question for you that's delicate," the man began. Sarah immediately tensed up. Something told her that the conversation wouldn't be pleasant. "What is it?" "My mother. She's very old now. Age, her mind isn't quite right. She's not incapacitated, of course, but my mother, she's like a child, you understand?" Sarah nodded. Of course, she knew that many people become childlike with age. And although yesterday's old woman hadn't given that impression, if her son said so, then it must be true. But what did she, Sarah, have to do with it? "Yesterday my mother found herself in a desperate situation. She was left without money, far from home. She was probably in despair, which is why she offered you her item in exchange for a bus ticket." "What item?" Sarah was genuinely surprised. The old woman hadn't offered her any item. The only thing was, she asked for a phone number to transfer the money. "What do you mean, what item?" The man looked closely at Sarah. Something hostile appeared in his whole demeanor. "She didn't give me anything. Nothing at all, that is. She just asked for money. I gave it to her, and that's it." "And that's all? You're lying to me right now. There are witnesses who saw and heard everything. In fact, it's thanks to them that I tracked you down. An acquaintance of mine works nearby here. He's the one who saw the whole scene and then noticed which building entrance you went into. And finding you there was no trouble. He just asked the neighbors which apartment you lived in and described your appearance based on his friend's words." "I don't understand anything." Sarah shook her head. "What are you accusing me of?" "Nothing yet. My mother gave you the jewelry voluntarily. You didn't extort it. There are witnesses to this. But now, as you're being stubborn, it doesn't look very good at all. You took advantage of the old woman not being in her right mind and took possession of a valuable item. What kind of item? Sarah exclaimed. Just explain everything properly. I don't understand anything. And you, it seems, are a brilliant actress, Mark said, curling his lips contemptuously. To be honest, I was hoping this was some kind of misunderstanding. By the way, it's a brooch, our family heirloom. Not only is it worth a tidy sum on its own, but it's also an antique, you understand? It's worth a fortune. And you think I have it? Well, who else? You gave the old woman money for the bus yesterday? Yes? Well, there, in return, she offered you her brooch. Perhaps you only took it because you didn't realize how valuable, how expensive it is. Mark seemed to be giving Sarah one last chance to get out of the situation with dignity. I didn't see any brooch. This is some kind of misunderstanding. My mother said she gave it to the girl who paid for her fare. That's you then, and you have the brooch. No, it's not. How can I prove it to you? Just give back the jewelry, and that's it. I have a witness, and my mother will confirm it in court if necessary. She'll confirm that you took the jewelry from her. In court? Sarah felt cold. Clammy goosebumps crawl up her back. This man? Was he really going to sue her? This is some kind of absurdity. But he had a witness. Apparently he really does. Otherwise, how would he have found her so quickly? What if Sarah can't prove anything in court? What if she's accused of extortion? After all, no one is immune to judicial errors. There are plenty of such cases, right? Sarah clutched her head. She can't become a defendant now, or even a suspect. Absolutely not. Eleanor is aware of her every move. She'll surely find out about this whole story immediately and, of course, use it to her advantage. The mother has problems with the law? That's already a strong argument for Child Protective Services. They could take Chloe away from her. This cannot be allowed. If you've already gotten rid of the brooch somewhere, Mark spoke again in a soft, insinuating voice. Well, you knew they'd be looking for it, didn't you? So you got rid of it as quickly as possible. Then at least return the money. It's worth about... And the man named a figure that made Sarah's head spin. She couldn't save up such a sum in several years, and they probably won't give her a loan. The last one isn't paid off yet, and her salary wouldn't allow it either. Unless it's somewhere with high interest? How would she live then? On what? The situation looked hopeless. A court case couldn't be allowed because in that case, her mother-in-law would finally get a chance to gain custody of her granddaughter. But there was nowhere to get the money either. You're mistaken, Sarah tried to reach Mark one more time. I didn't take that brooch, and I don't have the money. Excellent. Then we'll settle everything through court. The jewelry was insured. If they prove your guilt, which I personally have no doubt about, at least we'll be paid compensation. But in that case, you will have big problems. Wait, Sarah exclaimed. Give me a little time to think. It's just that this trouble fell on me so unexpectedly. I don't even know what to do. Just give the jewelry or return the money. Sarah shook her head. She wanted to scream right in the face of the negative Mark that she hadn't taken anything, but perhaps it wasn't worth angering him, because her fate now depended on him. I need time. All right, Mark nodded, but don't think for too long. Now we'll exchange phone numbers. I'll call the day after tomorrow. I hope you'll have found the money by then. Or finally decide to give back the brooch. Because otherwise we'll be talking differently. And most likely, in court. Mark turned sharply and walked towards the parking lot. Sarah watched after him for a long time. Mom, what happened? Chloe looked at her mother, who had returned after the unpleasant conversation with fright. You're so pale. Who was that man? Oh, just an old acquaintance. Nothing serious, Sarah smiled weakly. Shall we make pancakes? Remember? You promised to teach me? Of course. Chloe and Sarah spent about an hour messing around in the kitchen. The girl cheerfully chattered about her friends and teachers. The woman nodded, smiled where appropriate, looked surprised where appropriate, praised her. But in her thoughts, Sarah was far away. She was thinking about how to get out of this strange situation. Mark won't give up. That's obvious. He's got it into his head that Sarah appropriated the expensive brooch. Nothing will convince him otherwise. That old woman? Why did she say that about her? Maybe the grandmother is really not in her right mind and doesn't know what she's saying. Or did the elderly woman, having lost the brooch, invent a story for her son so he wouldn't scold her? Judging by how Mark behaved, he knows how to be tough, even cruel. Cold gaze, jerky movements. One way or another, Sarah needs to figure something out now. She absolutely cannot become a suspect now. It's still unknown if she'll be able to prove her innocence. There's only one option left. Find the money. But where? There's no one to help Sarah. Her parents themselves live in poverty. Her salary is decent, of course, but the debt that suddenly fell on her won't be covered even in several years. And they're unlikely to give her a loan. There was one way out. Turn to David. The main thing is that the man doesn't blab to his mother, and she'll quickly figure out how to turn the situation to her advantage. She's long dreamed of taking Chloe for herself. And David? He doesn't need his daughter, that's for sure. He won't fight for her. She'll have to swallow her hurt and pride and call her ex-husband. How hard is that? How unbearably hard? Well, what else can she do? David had never participated in his daughter's life, except for the meager alimony that landed on Chloe's card monthly. Maybe he could help just this one time. For him, the amount Mark was demanding wasn't that large. Sarah sent her daughter to watch cartoons and dialed the number she hadn't used for many years. David answered immediately. Is something wrong with Chloe? David asked in a rather indifferent tone. No, but it concerns her too. Something has happened to me. They met that same evening at the Cozy Cafe. David used to invite Sarah here for dates. Wonderful strawberry eclairs were sold here many years ago. However, they weren't on the menu anymore. So what's happened to you? David showed with his whole demeanor that he had little time. 5 years had passed since their divorce. David had hardly changed during this time. He still looked like a carefree guy from a youth TV series, a stylish regular at nightclubs. Perhaps Eleanor was right. David was an eternal boy. Sarah briefly told her ex-husband what had happened to her. A mocking look appeared in David's eyes. Yes, something like that could only happen to you. He's a typical fraudster. Threaten him with a police report. He's going to file a report against me, Sarah sighed. And I can't afford to be involved with that. You know yourself, your mother. She's just waiting for the right moment to take Chloe. Mother, David sighed sadly. That's true. I'm fed up with it too. She's always nagging me to sue for my daughter. Why would I need that? Besides, a child is always better off with its mother. Sarah nodded, and then asked again, But will you help me? Will you lend me money? Without interest? I'll pay you back little by little from each salary. No, David replied. I'm not going to sponsor criminals. He'll demand even more later. That's the kind of people they are. You can't feed him. Sarah sighed. She had already understood that she wouldn't get help from David. And anyway, turning to him was a mistake. When he calls you, tell him a report against him is already at the station, her ex-husband advised finally. Then he paid the bill and walked out of the cafe with long, sweeping strides. And Sarah was again left alone with her problem. Yes, she understood that Mark was possibly a fraudster. But what if he wasn't? She absolutely couldn't risk it, because Eleanor, she wasn't sleeping. Just recently, her mother-in-law had reported to Child Protective Services that her daughter-in-law was going out at night and not looking after her child. And all because Sarah had gone to a friend's birthday party. Chloe had indeed stayed home alone at that time. She had brushed her teeth herself, made her bed, and gone to sleep. Sarah returned when her daughter was already asleep. How did Eleanor find out about all this? Very simply, she saw a photo that included Sarah on one of her friend's pages, compared the dates and times, and used this picture as evidence. Sarah was indeed advised then to hire a babysitter for such occasions, but they also sympathized. Living under such close scrutiny from her former mother-in-law was difficult. Eleanor increasingly frightened Sarah with her persistence and desire to take her granddaughter. If she found out about a court case now, she would use all her connections to fulfill her long-held dream. No, Sarah wouldn't give her that chance. What to do? The woman decided to walk home. The way wasn't too short, but the weather was wonderful. Spring, the sun was shining, birds were singing, the sky was clear and bright blue. Not a cloud. The snow was melting literally before her eyes. Patches of bare asphalt had already appeared. Before, Sarah always felt a kind of spiritual uplift at such moments. Nature was waking up. Her favorite time of year, summer, was just around the corner. But today her heart was heavy. A completely insurmountable problem had suddenly fallen upon Sarah. How to solve it? Look for the money, or try to prove to Mark that she had nothing to do with it? Neither option seemed particularly viable. Sarah was trudging past the very same Rainbow shopping complex near which she had met the old woman. Imagine, they had to run into each other that evening. If Sarah had gone home later or earlier, none of this would have happened. She would have lived peacefully, enjoying the coming spring, the sun, the upcoming vacation. And suddenly the woman stopped as if struck by lightning. She even blinked her eyes several times to make sure she wasn't imagining it. The very same old woman was walking across the parking lot. The coat, the downy shawl, and the eyes of an incredible light blue shade. Next to the grandmother, gently supporting her by the elbow so she wouldn't slip on the melting snow, walked a young man. And it wasn't Mark. Not tall, light-haired, with a pleasant open face and eyes exactly like the old woman's. He was smiling and telling the elderly woman something. She listened attentively, occasionally interjecting her own remarks. The pair was walking away. They would probably get into this man's car and leave soon. No, this couldn't be allowed. Fate itself had given Sarah a unique chance to get out of the difficult situation. Now she would talk to the old woman, and perhaps everything would become clear. Sarah hurried after the man and the elderly woman across the parking lot. Maybe they're in league with that man. Sarah is in for another unpleasant conversation now, but it's worth trying, isn't it? Wait, Sarah called out to the old woman and the man when they were almost out of sight around the corner. The elderly woman was the first to turn around. For a moment she scrutinized Sarah, squinting her eyes nearsightedly, and a smile lit up the old woman's face. Apparently she recognized the passerby who had given her money for the fare a couple of days ago. The man, however, was seeing Sarah for the first time, and therefore looked questioningly at the stranger hurrying towards them at full speed. "Hello?" Sarah breathed out, catching up with the pair. "Good day," the man greeted. "Hello, darling," the grandmother smiled warmly. "I recognized you, you know. You were the one who helped me then. Thank you very much." The man, finally understanding what was going on, also smiled. "So you were the one who didn't walk past my mother then? She told me how desperate she was, and people just hurried past and paid no attention to her. Only you responded." "So you are also her son?" Sarah clarified. "What do you mean, also?" The grandmother was surprised. "Paul is my only son, a late, long-awaited one. Before him, I only had daughters. I have 4 daughters. They are all much older than my son. The older ones are grandmothers themselves now. What about Mark? Sarah stared wide-eyed at the mother and son. What Mark? The old woman frowned. I don't think I know anyone like that. Did something happen to you? Paul finally guessed. And is it somehow connected to the time you met my mother? Is that right? Sarah nodded silently. She didn't understand anything at all yet. One thing was clear. Mark was a fraudster after all, and now it was known for sure. But many questions remained. And the main one, how to act now. Mark is a fraudster. Sarah fell into his sights. Who knows how he'll behave? What if he starts threatening her? Or does something to her? Or, God forbid, to Chloe? How scary. Tell us what happened, Paul asked gently. Tell us. Paul gently stroked Sarah's shoulder. This friendly gesture, it changed a lot. The woman suddenly realized that she wanted to share her story with this person. She really wanted to. I should probably introduce myself first, she sighed. My name is Sarah. That evening I was coming back from work. I came out of the shopping complex and saw an elderly woman. She was asking people something, but everyone was hurrying about their business. And Sarah told them everything, and how she gave the old woman money for the fare, and about the morning call, and the conversation with Mark. She also mentioned her own doubts and anxieties. She also had to share details of her personal life with her listeners. How else would they understand why Sarah didn't go to the police immediately? Paul listened without interrupting. His mother occasionally shook her head, clicked her tongue, and sighed, sometimes inserting angry, condemning remarks. Sometimes she was harsh on Mark, sometimes on Eleanor. Sarah's former mother-in-law got her share. And David, who didn't help the mother of his child in a difficult moment. What a brute, the old woman shook her head. He understood that Mark was a fraudster, didn't he? Well, he could have met with him, talked to him like a man. Yes, dear girl, you're having a tough time in this life, all by yourself, always by yourself. After listening to Sarah, Paul silently considered her story for a while. His mother, meanwhile, showered the woman with words of support. It was clear that she sincerely wanted to encourage Sarah, to instill in her the confidence that everything would be all right. From this care, tears even appeared in Sarah's eyes, but she quickly blinked them back. Now was not the time to relax. We'll expose this, Mark, Paul finally declared. And he said it so convincingly that Sarah felt with every cell of her body. She was no longer alone. She had protection. It's strange, unexpected. After all, Paul and his mother are complete strangers. Still, Sarah had not the slightest doubt. Paul knew what to do in this situation. I have a good friend who works in the investigative committee. I started there myself, you know. But then I went into business. I urgently needed money. My father was very ill. I'll call my friend right now, and I'll keep you updated on what's happening. You'll have to come in and give a statement. When exactly? I don't know yet, but definitely soon. Sarah nodded. Yes. Now it wasn't scary to turn to law enforcement. Thank you, the woman said. Thank you for your kindness. Why wouldn't I help a good person? The man smiled. That smile warmed Sarah's heart. You didn't walk past my mother either when she needed help. And you only ended up in this terrible situation because of us. On the way home, Sarah replayed the details of this conversation over and over in her mind. Imagine that. Could it really be true? Sarah was seriously afraid that meeting Paul was just her imagination. What if her brain, desperately searching for a way out of a difficult situation, had just invented this scene? No, that couldn't possibly be true. And yet, there were doubts. Paul called a couple of hours later. Sarah hadn't expected such promptness. At first, she flinched at the sharp trill of her cell phone. Fear squeezed her heart with a cold, clammy hand. What if it's Mark again? He'll start threatening, accusing, frightening again? But Paul's cheerful voice came through the receiver. Can you be on P Street in 40 minutes? They're waiting for you in Office 307. They're already aware. Of course. And then everything spun with dizzying speed. Paul was already waiting for Sarah on the steps of the tall building with massive columns.